Yes, I read an article the other day that claimed the world's weather was changing.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yes, isn't it?
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. So I'm joined by Shel Horowitz, who is a green transformative biz profitability expert. Thanks for joining today, Shel.
Pleasure to be with you, Scott.
All right. So I want to start kind of more broadly in terms of the kind of historic change, I guess, within digital marketing. So when you look at kind of the past 20 years post.com, terms like SEO, SEM marketing has been, more or less has been triumphed as fundamentals of online digital marketing. But do you feel like things have changed, and does the old tactics and strategies still apply today?
Things have changed, but most of the changes have to reconfiguration of the mindset or the tactics so much as an understanding that this is a different platform. So online marketing is new and different in the last 30 years or so as television marketing was in the 1940s and 50s, as radio marketing was in the 1920s, as whatever they did in 1896 that they didn't do in 1870. So, going all the way back, at least as far as Gutenberg, there's been an evolution. But the basic ideas that I feel the basic principles of marketing are things that people don't really understand. It's stuff like provide the solution to a person's problem or their ability to grow or their ability to have fun, as opposed to telling them how great you are. So that's a principle that was probably true in the time of the Old Testament, and it's still true. And I do think that certain things, we now have the ability to measure all sorts of things we couldn't measure in the pre-digital era, like how many people are seeing your ad and how many people are clicking on it. So that's different. We have the whole search engine optimization piece, which is different. But ultimately, the marketing mindset is still not that different. It's how do you solve the problem? How do you make people happy? How do you give them what they want, accomplish a goal, or solve a problem?
Well, I think from a general framework of fundamentally marketing being a supporting function of sales, I think that still holds true. I do think that some of the key paradigms have been shifting quite a bit. So, for example, again, this is about enablement, right? So if you look at things like Instagram Live, it's allowing for real-time bilateral conversations that could not have happened before.
This is true.
And because I think to your point, marketing or communication broadly was really oriented towards a one-way megaphone type of an approach. And I think technology has come to a point where things are allowing for real-time feedback from the people that you're actually trying to target.
Yeah, and that's huge for marketers. And it's one of many changes that we have had in the landscape. Another is that companies that used to be focused on a 3-mile radius, a 10-mile radius, a 50-mile radius, we're all global now. I had my first international client in 1995. And I'm a one-person shop. That's one huge difference. And another is that hypertext is an amazing thing, that you can start with maybe a fairly shallow piece of information about something you're interested in, like, I want to know more. Click, you learn more. Click, you learn more again. In the old days, you might have a magazine article, but if you wanted to go find out something on a deeper level, you'd have to go to the library, find the encyclopedia, hope it was within the last 20 years that it was printed, read the article, follow the reference sources, and now we can do all this from the comfort of our own desk. And that's That changes a whole lot of stuff, especially in terms of being able to compare companies with each other and products with each other. We all have access to information that not that long ago would have been very closely guarded and expensive.
Agreed. I mean, I think that's fundamentally the definition of the internet.
Yeah.
I'm curious, because you are very much in the forefront of marketing, what your perspective is around the change in online marketing as it pertains to in-game concert series. So if you look at, gaming titles like Fortnite, they are featuring concerts or artists such as Diplo, Noah Cyrus, Young Thug. And of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, where people are locked down, there's been an increase in or usage of Twitch viewership, as well as jump in esports influencers on TikTok. So things have really kind of changed, and I think there is this recognition by corporate media or marketers, I would say, that the new frontier of social media is really within the games, and then driving that into the brand and the brand initiatives.
That's really outside my expertise, Scott, but I will say that one of the things the pandemic has really done for a lot of musicians is given them that global platform because they had no choice. Although it's also true that some arts translate better to Zoom than others. I think that theater works very, very well online. Music is more of a challenge unless you have the musicians all in one place, or unless you do some fairly complex processing involving piecing together individual artists' contributions to a group musical piece that has to be very, very precise. And if it's a half second off, it'll sound awful. So, but I think what we're seeing with the pandemic is we're seeing a lot of people thinking about what is really important to them. And that's where some of my expertise is more applicable, particularly the part about business becoming a lever for changing the world.
Yep. So let's get into that a little bit. So kind of going back to the SEO, SEM, and when we think about keyword search and keyword paid search, but also realizing that certain marketers have recognized that in that marketing tactics, it's about dominating a category or keywords so that they're more effective than any other people that's using those keywords. In this case, the use of green, for instance, however you decide to define that, and really own that SEO, SEM category. Can you first define what green means to you, and how do you advise your clients to market properly?
Green is about working with the earth as opposed to against it. For the last 300 years or so, the dominant model has been to work against the earth, to pollute, to remove resources and not replenish them, to provide a product and service in ways that contribute to declines of people's health. And I'd say in the last 30 years, there's really been a shift away from that, and it's a very powerful thing. And you've seen in the last 15 years or so, a lot of the big corporations jumping on board and saying, oh, look at us, we're green, we're sustainable.
Yep.
But I feel that sustainability isn't enough, that we have to look at regenerativity. Sustainability is keeping things from getting worse, keeping them the same. Regenerativity is actually making them better. So an example might be a company that makes solar LED lamps to replace kerosene. And kerosene is flammable, it's toxic, it's expensive, it's polluting, all of those negatives. You replace that with a clean, strong light that doesn't cost anything once the lamp is paid for, that doesn't pollute, that has no fire risk, and that provides enough light that people perhaps who have an agricultural day job can start a craft industry at home in the evening, or the kids can get better grades and ultimately better jobs, and this $20 lamp becomes a ladder out of poverty. That sort of stuff really turns me on. And my advice to companies that are kind of trying to get into that space is to market to two categories of people: those who believe in what you're doing and those who only want the product. And you have to do that differently. One size definitely doesn't fit all. So you might be able to sell, I don't know, some kind of quilt for a bed. And you might say to the people who are concerned about the green pieces, you might say, no ducks were harmed to collect the down for this quilt. It was all done from other ways. We fed those ducks on really good, high quality organic grain and stuff like that. And then to the other people, the non-greens, you would say, this is going to be the warmest, most comfortable blanket you've ever had on your bed. You appeal to their self-interest. And when you appeal to both the global interest and the self-interest, I think you have, as a marketer, a winning combination. And I talk about that quite a bit, actually, in my latest book, Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World. which I co-authored with the late Jay Conrad Levinson. And there are about 100 books in the Guerrilla Marketing series, and I've written 2 of them. So it was a really nice partnership. And partnerships are a great way to expand your reach as a marketer, I might say.
Yeah, so I want to kind of explore this binary approach that you're talking about, which is one is based on values and ethos. The other is more product characteristics or the benefit derived from that product. So if you think about Kickstarter as well as Indiegogo types of crowdsourcing, it's really oriented towards, yes, a little bit of aspirational, but it's really around the function. But let's say it's, UNSCG for the most part, it's around values. It's something aligned, something that they share. It's greater than themselves, and they want to be part of a movement. So they don't perceive that product as a product that they buy, but they perceive that as something that's a part of who they are. So, for example, I've had founders of certain water bottles and different brands, and it's interesting to see some of the millennials and Gen Zs flock to certain brands because they associate those products or brand with climate change, with ocean preservations, and so forth. So that's what you're talking about. And my question there is, how does hyper data, especially things that's available through Facebook as well as Google and Instagram, how is that able to really, laser focus on those specific individuals down to literally that individual?
Well, I'm going to be a bit of a heretic here, and I definitely recognize the importance of laser targeting, but I think for a lot of the smaller businesses out there, it's going to be prohibitive, not so much to acquire the data as to do anything useful with it, because they don't have teams of engineers and banks of computers and the massive resources needed to actually extract that data in a useful way. But I think doing things like media exposure, like public speaking to very targeted audiences can be just as effective, a lot cheaper, and brand you as an expert in a way that just running the numbers and algorithms doesn't actually do. Now, I speak from the perspective of somebody who is a one-person business and who works a lot with very small entrepreneurs, companies that don't have big payroll. And I think that there are many, many ways to get the message in front. I am a big, big fan of finding people who already reach your target market and figuring out how they can benefit from essentially offering you up to their audience, their tribe.
So, Shel, if I'm understanding correctly, by you coming onto my show, you're basically practicing what you're preaching. Is that right?
Yeah, I do. In a typical year, I do 30 to 50 media interviews. And that's one of the strategies I use to promote myself. Discussion lists are another great one because you can find communities online where people are talking about what you want them to be talking about, and you can participate in those discussions. And what I found is that sometimes in those discussions, I will be perceived as an authority by people who are already perceived as an authority. And when the biggest names in your field start recommending you, people notice that and people follow their advice.
So I want to go back to this notion of the green message, and I think some of the things that you focus on is this notion of profitability. Like I said, with the rise and socialization of UN SDGs and corporate interests, and I think their level of interest has really changed, where it used to be just marketing ploy, but they are really trying to align themselves and in some cases actually transform their operation and even their manufacturing backend.
Yeah, companies wouldn't expect. Companies like Walmart. Walmart actually sells more organic food than Whole Foods. Walmart has done more to green the supply chain than anything I will do in all my years of speaking and writing and consulting, because Walmart has as its suppliers the people who need to make those changes. And it's been quite astounding. And the SDGs, the UN goals, have been a really nice framework for this. I was fairly skeptical when they were introduced and in the earlier version, the Millennial Development Goals, and then they were expanded into the SDGs. I didn't expect much to change from that, and actually a lot has changed. On those metrics, the progress from 20 years ago is astounding. So that's really, really exciting, and companies have finally figured out that if they want to keep their customer base, they have to be about more than their own bottom line. They have to be about serving the world in some way. And that really is a big, big shift. It's a much bigger shift ultimately than whether you're marketing on the internet or in a newspaper.
I agree. And I think that's exactly the point that I think both of us are trying to make, is that, given that, these social causes have become very sexy, do you feel that do you need to sell green as being sexy, at least the messaging that I see or read? And then the other piece is, in your messaging, there's this underlying assumption that businesses believe that going green isn't profitable, when in fact we're starting to see real empirical evidence that, companies that are using CSRs and ESGs, yes, in fact, it is profitable. And actually, to your point, it brings the right consumers that, that really connect with those value systems. So the point is it still valuable to talk about green in the context of profitability?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is every study I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them because I've written 4 books about this out of my 10, every single study has shown that companies that are doing the right thing in a good way, in a way that's smart, make more money, spend less money. So their revenues are up, their profits are up, their expenses are down. It's just amazing to me how people still haven't figured this out, and people still think, oh, going green is so expensive, it's so difficult. It's not. You do the easy stuff first. Like, okay, let's say you still have incandescent lights in your facility. Yank them out, put in the LEDs, they're down to $1 a piece. They last for 10 or 15 years. I did an analysis several years ago when they were about $10 a piece, where I figured out that if somebody had a big building like an arena with a high ceiling, and they were changing 50 light bulbs a year when they had incandescents, that if they switched to LEDs, they would save $4 million, not so much on the cost of the light bulb, but on the cost of the labor to go out there with the cherry picker and change the light bulb. And when people start thinking holistically like that, you see people like Amory Lovins and the Rocky Mountain Institute, who is one of my heroes. They were among the companies participating in a deep energy retrofit of all things, the Empire State Building. Empire State Building was built in 1931. Gas was pretty close to free. Oil was pretty close to free. You can believe they did not design for energy sustainability. So they spent $13 million on this project. It took them over a year to do it. And wow, they were saving $4.5 million a year. That is a 33% ROI annually. Where are you going to get a 33% ROI? But you can do it by converting an old building into a green building.
They don't need to be convinced that it's actually profitable and actually it's good for customer loyalty and goodwill. I think those are starting to become kind of the new baseline.
Yeah. I remembered it was about making green sexy, and is that still important? One of my more popular talks is called Making Green Sexy. And because you have several audiences to convince. You have the deep greens, the lazy greens, as I call them, people who do the right thing if it's easy and cheap and convenient, and you have the non-greens, and they all need a different approach to make green sexy. We talked a little bit about this in the quilt example, but there's in any industry you're in, you have that challenge. And there are the ones who are actually hostile to the idea, the ones who pride themselves on driving their Hummer a quarter mile to buy their cigars at a local store. And so each one of those needs a different approach. The same thing that is sexy to me as a deep green who's been in the environmental trenches since 1970 when the first Earth Day kind of captured me, to that Hummer driving, cigar smoking, I don't care about the world, I've got my piece and that's it. You need very different approaches. And we're seeing this.
Going back to, I think your typical clients that tend to be smaller businesses where they have finite set of resources and they can deploy the kind of massive promotions or advertising that maybe large corporations can do. So, in terms of kind of the pyramid of strategies, so aside from PR, using certain platforms that I'm sure you and I are very familiar with, but also, such as podcasts, such as being able to reach out to particular reporters or journalists that's covering those particular topics, start with large media, as well as, like you said, speaking on certain topics, establishing as a subject matter expert, and then lastly, publishing books. Now, in that mix, do you go much into the digital marketing in terms of targeted ads? And the reason I say that is search ads can be expensive, but if it's hyper-targeted, specifically the way you're talking about, a small business may end up having 4 or 5 very different, distinct customer base and messages. There's a kind of efficiency to hyper-targeted advertising, especially if it's a distinct product or service or offering.
Yeah.
So just curious to see, how you think about the overall mix of things that small businesses should be thinking about.
Advertising can certainly be a part of the mix, and hyper-targeting, if you're going to do search engine advertising, I'd say look for phrases rather than words, and those phrases should be so specific that you will not be catching any fish that you're going to throw back in the pond. That the only people who'd be searching for that phrase would be somebody who wants exactly what you're selling. And the issue with those is that you may get so few searches that the search engine companies get tired of you and say, time to cancel your account because you're not getting enough traffic for these phrases. But the people who do come through are going to be exactly who you want to reach. That's one. Joint venture partnerships is another one I think has to be part of every business's mix. Who are reaching the people that you want to reach with what kind of message, and how can you partner with them so that they want to partner with you? And that could be a financial reward. It could be many other things. I had a conversation just today with a gentleman who I am going to be actually rewriting one of his landing pages for free, because this is a man who has done me a number of favors over the years, including having me on his podcast and giving a lot of exposure to that, and various other services that I've taken advantage of him, that he has offered to me for free. So this is kind of a karmic give back, if you will. I'm not going to charge him for what I'm going to do. I offered it out of the clear blue sky. He wasn't expecting it. So the next time that he's offering me a favor, he'll remember that I did him a nice favor. But it's not about tit for tat. It's just about sort of building up the energy of the universe, if I can get a little woo-woo here, and making the pie higher, in that immortal phrase, the only time you'll ever hear me quoting George W. Bush. I just love that, make the pie higher. But I do believe in an abundant world. And I think looking at things through the lens of abundance allows a lot of these opportunities to show up that don't necessarily revolve around the injection of cash. So customer service is a part of marketing. Sales is a part of marketing. And marketing is also a part of sales. A lot of these things are very interwoven. And again, the more holistically you look at things, the more some of the connections become clear. And one of the things that my consulting clients tell me I'm really good at is seeing something through different eyes and coming up with something that's really different from what they had thought of themselves. And it's because I look at how these connections interface with each other.
Sounding very interesting, and thank you for sharing your perspective.
And my site is goingbeyondsustainability.com.
So with that, I've been joined by Shel Horowitz, who is a green transformative biz profitability expert. If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.